I'm Julia Fisher, and on the Olive Tree today we find ourselves in Haifa in northern Israel, meeting with Rita Tsukahira, a Jewish believer who, for several years now, has worked amongst refugees, women and children who fled from countries in Africa through Egypt and arrived in Israel desperate and with nowhere to go. In recent years, so many refugees have arrived at Israel's borders that the nation has been hard pushed to cope with the scale of the problem. As we heard on last week's programme, Rita was surprised and often overwhelmed to find herself doing this work, so I asked her how she has coped with this on a personal level.
You know, these are the most challenging questions in terms of anyone, and I think all of us who desire to obey the words of Yeshua, who says to give to the very least of them, to go to the widow and the fatherless. Our world is filled with people who need hands that will go to them and feed them and give. And so when the floodgates started opening a year or so later, after we had taken in, and we were the only shelter for that first year, we looked around and said, there's no way. There's people living in parks, there's people on streets. How do we deal with it? How do we make decisions? Who to say yes to? Who to say no to? And, you know, first of all, if we believe there is one who directs our path, we have to say, Father, show me. Show me the one you've chosen. Show me the one that you have picked out, because you know that our particular home, our particular shelter is going to be able to bring life to that one. And that's really what's happened over the years, when you have to make a decision between one woman who is coming out of prison and one woman who is sleeping on the streets and one woman who is pregnant and has nowhere to go. And, you know, I have to just say, Father, show us. And he has. And so when we do see the changes in lives, and we do see that, I remember one family in particular, years ago, we said, you know, they should stay here with us. It was a single woman. She had crossed the border with her brother and sister, who were preteens, and she gave birth in our shelter in our very few first weeks that she was with us. And normally we preparing people to go out into the world to get jobs. And we felt so strongly that these teenagers, almost teens, needed our environment where they would get big brothers, where they would be nurtured, where they wouldn't be just out there in the city. And so we kept them with us. And quite honestly, two of them are still with us, the brother and sister. We did have to deal with the government's decision to send back most of the South Sudanese. But these two are still with us, and we're still seeking the best alternative for their life. They're now orphans. They have neither mother nor father. So we listen to the biblical imperative of serving the orphans, of serving those who have no other place. And that's really how we have to make decisions.
Rita, you obviously haven't done this on your own. You've needed help. Now, has it been easy finding the right kind of helpers?
Again, we trust in the ones that the Lord sends us, and we have had a tremendous team. Arab women who have had, you know, deep relationships with the Lord have come to serve with us. We had one Arab woman who actually came up from being a woman in the shelter, who had come as a result of her family's threatening her own life. She stayed with us, she was discipled, and she became a staff member and now has moved on. We have an Ethiopian Jewish woman who came to faith a few years ago, who really is a tremendous asset to our team, because even though the languages are a bit different between the Ethiopians and the Eritreans, there is an identification and a trust. We have women who are themselves immigrants from the United States. One man who was our big daddy and big brother came as an immigrant, a Jew from England. So I really look at it as a tremendous testimony of God's putting together those people who will best serve and best be the ones who can bring life to these who are hurting. We also are tremendously blessed by volunteers. There are no words for the ones who have come, both young men and young women, from nations, from England, from the US, from Germany, from Singapore, from Canada, just giving their lives. And they get so involved, especially with our children. At times we've had 25 or so children, 60 babies born. We need to have help. And I say even at times I'll look back and say, wow, where did they all come from?
Now, as we say, the problem is enormous, but you're taking it very much that you're helping individual people and that they're each on a journey and God has got his eye on every one of them.
So true. And, you know, we have to meet them where they are. If a woman comes to you and she's been so terribly abused and raped, she wants to give up her baby, and we have given 4 up for adoption. How do you work with that? You have to pour yourself into it and look at their lives. And, you know, to see a woman smiling because she has somehow been blessed in being in a place that makes her feel loved and valued. We have a wonderful project called Africa's Heart that sort of sprung up grassroots. One of our very creative volunteers got the women to do what they create. And we went on from there to a very specific focus. In fact, one of our English volunteers brought a whole new direction when she introduced making bags. So these women sit who have been treated as really trash, and they make these beautiful creations, these bags that we sell to friends, to people visiting. It's really a ministry work because it brings healing to them. And of course, they do get pocket money. They get what that bag is worth. There's just ways to see healing. And I mentioned before that there was a woman who came to us who had been, actually 2 different women who had been considered victims of human trafficking. I walked in the other day. Both of them were lying on their beds reading the New Testament in their language, Tigrinya. And I thought, wow, they are seeking their own. That to me is a tremendous sign of healing. They're not just sitting there going, what am I going to do? They're reading the Word of God. And we have a young pastor who himself is a refugee who comes every other week or so from Tel Aviv to teach them in their own language. So all of these things together is bringing life to the one, because we can't go out and do for the thousands. But, you know, Yeshua said he left the 99 for the one, and that's really what guides us.
How do you see the future, Rita? You find this whole, you were so surprised to find yourself working with refugees and taking on these women, but it's a huge responsibility. Do you feel the weight of it or not?
Tremendous. You know, I'm a person that doesn't like to tell people where to go for dinner in case they don't like it. To make a decision whether a woman should leave or do this or move her along is huge. I can only say that we try again with the wisdom and the direction from on high, from the Lord, to understand whether once she's ready to move out, whether we can provide some resources, some help, especially, of course, with younger people who we've paired up with families that can't officially adopt them but can help them and be a family to them. So we are doing what we can to make them less dependent on us, and then, of course, to move into independence.
Presumably you're having to find all your resources yourself.
Well, I would say we have learned by by trial and error. I knew nothing. I do not come from a social work background. And again, we've had wonderful people who have helped us in the NGO community, but we are also helping each other. And yes, I have learned where to get some resources, but I'm still on a learning curve.
You thought some years ago, Rita, that God didn't have a particular plan for your life. You thought you were watching other people getting on with what they were envisioned to do, but for yourself, you had no great expectation. Now, looking back over the last 10, 12 years, that must have changed.
Yes, I would say radically. You know, I think when you make the huge changes we have coming to a new country, coming as immigrants, the talents I had, so to speak, were not really useful here. And like many women, you go through the years of early, your children being young and early childhood. And I think the real lesson, if I could say, is just to keep your ears open. Because when we had the opportunity to purchase these buildings and had no money, and you know, that again is the story that could be told, but to hear what is my part. Never. We started with one woman who was from a Colombian background, never ever thinking God would open the doors. And I'm sure, you know, people know this, but it's to be available and to keep your ear open to the voice of the Spirit.
Rita Tsukahira, a Jewish believer living in the north of Israel. And you're listening to The Olive Tree with me, Julia Fisher. The Olive Tree Reconciliation Fund is a Christian charity based in the UK that supports the needs of both Jewish believers and Arab Christians living in Israel and the wider Middle East. If you would like to know more about our work and receive our free bi-monthly newsletter, please either visit our website, olivetreefund.org, or write to me, Julia Fisher, at the Olive Tree Reconciliation Fund, P.O. Box 850, Horsham, RH12, 9GA in the UK. I'll be back at the same time next week for another story from the Olive Tree. Until then, goodbye.